With our Symbology spreadsheet now edited, now it's time to take on the definitions for our features that point to our symbologies. Shown here, we have multiple tabs that we need to complete. Let's start with our point feature definitions. We have the name of the feature definition that came over from Select Series 4. We have the path of the particular feature definition for the point feature. Then we have the feature definition description, which is new and it's going to be blank in our spreadsheet. As a starting point, you may take the name and copy it over to the description column and then revise that even more if you would like. For example, if you want to remove abbreviations, spell those out, this would be a good place to do that in your description field. And these first 4 columns are going to be the same for all of our feature definitions for the most part: the name, the path, the description, and the name seed. The name seed can be thought of as a prefix. For example, if you have an alignment that you want to place, it's going to use this field as the beginning part of the name if there's something in here. And so you can't have more than one feature definition with the same name in a drawing, and so it will numerically increment if you try to use the same name. But this gives you a starting point in your tool settings box. The item type is pointing to MicroStation item types. If you want to assign things to your point feature definitions, for example, maybe a pay item number, you could specify an item type path here to a MicroStation item type. And then lastly, you have your symbology of your point feature definition. This is pointing to the entry in your other spreadsheet. And so if we take a look, for example, at a mailbox in our point feature definition, you will see that it points to a point feature symbology of this path: point, miscellaneous, mailbox. And so if we jump back over to our symbology and look at that, one of the things that I want you to notice in the Symbology spreadsheet is the path for the mailbox starts with a folder name called miscellaneous. All right, so don't get confused with column C. Column C is your MicroStation element template. Column B is the path in Connect for that particular point feature identification. So if we take a look back at Connect, how this fits together, we have our point feature definition mailbox, and you can see that it points to a symbology called mailbox in the folder miscellaneous. And so if I were to manually pick this, you would see my feature symbology, miscellaneous, and mailbox, and the path, the folder name, is actually stored here under the hood, if you will, so it's not visible to the user. They can just see the entry of the name of the actual symbology. So now you can see in the spreadsheet we have the folder path miscellaneous for the symbology, the name is mailbox, and then if we look at the definition, again, its particular path is also miscellaneous, but the point here is in column F. We're pointing to the point feature in a folder called miscellaneous, and the name is mailbox. So you do see the full type of feature, the feature path, and the feature name symbology in here in the spreadsheet, but in OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition in the properties, you only see mailbox as the listing, but the whole path is stored underneath the hood, if you will. So that is the feature definitions that you would want to complete for your point features. Okay, and this is just a few examples here. Now, we expect this list to grow once we incorporate OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition survey, and so this will, become quite a bit larger. This is just a starting point, and eventually I would anticipate we will be coming back here and setting up point features for survey. And so that will be completed in a later update release. Then we have our linear feature definitions. And one of the unique things here is in our linear, when we bring those forward, the alignments tab is going to be blank because there was no such thing as an alignment feature definition in Select Series 4. So in our linear, I'm going to find my entries for my alignments, which it just so happens is the top 4 here. and I'm going to right click and I'm going to cut these. I'm going to jump over to my alignment tab and I'm going to paste, because that's where anything to do with our alignments it belongs. And so we'll take those out of our linear tab, and then I can delete those 4 rows. And so we'll talk about the rest of the alignments in a minute, but we need to move those from the linear to the alignment tab. And those are entries that are going to support stationing typically, and possibly to be able to push templates along a particular linear. So on our linear feature definitions, we have the name, we have the folder path, we have a description, and again, as I suggested in our symbologies, you can do the same thing here as a starting point for your description field. You can come over here and copy your name, paste it in your description field, and then I would then consider editing these, give them a more complete description if you wish. Then you have your name seed. So if you're not giving something a name, it'll put this in as the beginning default. If you want to put item types on your linear features, for example, maybe you have a linear feature of a curved flow line and you want to put a pay item number on it or something like that, you can assign MicroStation item type entries here. We also have a column to create our 2D template geometry. So as we're processing our templates in our corridor and building our 3-dimensional model with our components and break lines, if you also want to have the corresponding 2D plan element drawn as a child plan element of the corridor, you can set this to true. Typically, you would want this to be turned on at minimum for your proposed edge of pavements, because when you place civil cells for like intersections and driveways, you will need that edge of pavement to be truly profiled. And so setting this to true will then draw that edge of pavement in your plan view so that you can use that. Then you have your symbologies. These are not MicroStation element templates. These are feature symbologies that we edited in our prior video in looking at the symbology spreadsheet. So what you have here is the type of feature. So you have linear, then you have the folder path, barrier, and then you have the name. And same thing on the profile. You have the type of feature symbology, profile, then you have the folder path, barrier, and then you have the name. Here's a little tip if you want to modify hundreds of entries and change the path in here to a different path. And I'm going to do just a quick example here. Let's say that everything that uses template points, we want to change template points to some other entry. You can highlight the portion that you want to modify. Let's say that I want to modify and change the folder name template points to template feature points. So I can select that range and select Control F on my keyboard for find and replace. And I can go to replace and I can say I want to find template points and replace with template feature points. And I'm going to switch to search by columns within the sheet. And then I can simply just do a replace all, and it will modify everything that I have highlighted and make those changes to that path. So if I, for example, if I changed my path in my feature symbology spreadsheet, I would also need to change that path here where I'm pointing to that entry in my feature definitions. And so this is a quick and easy way to modify a portion of the path in your column spreadsheet without having to do every one individually. So once you have your linear feature path and symbologies for your profiles set, you can move on then to your alignments. Now on your alignments, if you remember, we moved those over from our linears. And typically on the alignments, I don't usually put a folder in there, and so I just leave those right under the root structure. And so under alignment, you're going to have entries that look like this without a folder. I just have not found a real reason to do that. You may have folders in here, for example, proposed alignments versus existing alignments. There's reasons that you could do that, but if you don't have a folder, that's going to be the look that you have. Then you have the description. So again, you can come over here as a starting point and populate your description field. Then your name seeds, and then for your item types, if you want to set those up. And this one is for applying a template along the corridor. If you look at the examples in Training Workspace, there is under alignments a folder called Preliminary Planning with a couple of entries, a rule undivided and a rule divided roadway. And so you could set a pointer here to a template if you wish, but this doesn't have to be false. As you can see in this situation, I went ahead and specified the complete path to a template in the template library that I can process while I'm drawing that particular piece of alignment geometry. And so there are options here. It's either false or it's a full path and name to a template in the template library for the corridor template. Then you have your symbology for your 2D plan view and your symbology for your profile view as you're drawing this element, and that's again not pointing to a MicroStation element template, but pointing to your symbology, your feature symbology we just defined in the prior video. So very similar to linear, it's just adding this additional column for the corridor template. The super elevation is a brand new feature definition, and so we need to complete this, and there's quite a bit here to enter. And so what I would suggest is taking the delivered definitions export that we used from our training and examples that we exported in a prior video and copying the information from the super elevation tab over to this spreadsheet. Now, if you remember when we looked at this in an earlier video, there wasn't a lot to this particular feature definition, so I'm just going to go in and copy everything in here. Copy that, and we're going to paste that into our definition spreadsheet, which is here. And if you remember when I was talking about these particular types of feature definitions for super elevation, we are pointing to the linear feature symbology definition in our spreadsheet for the boundary of the super elevation section, and so that is this pointer, which would need to be created in your spreadsheet because, again, this is a brand new feature definition. It's very likely not going to be in your spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at creating that in our spreadsheet. And so in our Symbologies export spreadsheet, we need to make an entry that we can point to. So I'm going to call this super section, and I'm going to give it a folder path here under a folder name called super elevation. And then I'm going to need a MicroStation element template here created that is under the folder structure linear, super elevation, super section. And we will go in and create all of our necessary element templates in a separate video, but just remember this is one of them that we will need to create. Okay, so this will provide us our symbology, and so we'll save that, and then back into our definition we need to then point to that, and so we are linear, super elevation, super section. And so now that symbology is created for us in our symbology spreadsheet, and we're pointing to that in our feature definition. And then the other two element templates, MicroStation element templates that will be required, you'll see here. And so those are two more that we'll need to create before we actually import our symbologies and our definitions. So we have the boundary feature symbology. We have whether to turn on fill for our lanes, super elevation lanes, yes or no, true or false. And then on our roadway lanes, we can identify a MicroStation element template that sets the level, color, style, and weight for the left and right side. And then lastly, we can enable or disable the color gradation as we're changing our cross slopes. So that is the super elevation feature definition. Next is our corridor feature definition, and again, this is a feature definition that did not exist in Select Series 4. We did have similar entries in our project settings, if you will. In order to fill these out quickly, I'm going to go grab the feature definitions from the delivered example training workspace. So we jump over to that particular one, which is here, and I'm going to grab the 4 definitions that were delivered with the product just to give me a starting point, because there are a lot of entries in this one. And so I'm going to go all the way over here, grab all these entries. This is a big one. And I'm going to Control C to copy. Then I'm going to go back to my definitions spreadsheet, which is here, and I'm going to paste those entries. Now we can go in and begin to explore making changes to these. You have the corridor feature definition name, and if you want to put them in a folder, you can. I've not really seen a reason to put those in a folder, so I'm putting those right at the root level. And what we're talking about here is these features right here, as you see, and there's a lot of properties to complete in these particular corridor feature definitions, but you can think of these as the project settings that we did in Select Series 4. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory. We have the description and the name seed. Then if you want to put item types on there, you certainly can. The template drop interval multiplier, again, this is something that we've been using for years now in the product. On the horizontal and vertical cardinal points, do we process those, true or false? The external control points, processing those, true or false? Densifications of horizontal and vertical for each of the entries. Do we want to enable clipping when we have civil cells? Do we want to automatically show the top mesh display, which I would recommend not setting that to true for performance? The feature definition for the top mesh, if we do want to manually turn that on, and then the same thing for the bottom mesh display. And these are pointing to, again, not MicroStation element templates, but these are pointing to feature definition symbologies in our prior spreadsheet. So the next thing we need to do is we need to create these 4 entries, or actually they're 2 because they're repeated. The top mesh and the bottom mesh need to be created in our Symbology spreadsheet. So if we go to our delivered export of our symbologies, you'll see that I have entries here for those, and so I can just copy those and put those into our Symbologies spreadsheet, which is here, and we can paste those in our Surface tab. And so we're going to be creating a folder here called Modeling, and under Modeling we're going to have another folder here for corridor meshes, and then we're going to use a MicroStation element template to define the symbology of the bottom mesh and the top mesh. And so we'll just use a default here using the same, where our path is going to be modeling / corridor meshes, and the names of the symbologies will be bottom and top mesh. And so that will give us access then to those entries that we need. So we go back over to our definitions. That will take care of finding this particular entries. Then if we scroll on over, in terms of do we want to see our components, I normally set that to true. Now you might have an entry over here, for example, that you say, design linear brake lines only, or design 3D brake lines. And if that's the case, you might want to come over here and set the components column to false, and so that it wouldn't draw the 3D mesh components and only draw the 3D brake lines. Then you have your linear features display. In other words, do you want to see those 3D brake lines? True or false to show any null points you might be using in your templates. And then this is new to OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, the ability to show major contours. And so you see we have one entry called Final Width Contours where that's set to true. And we have set an interval. And then if you're going to display the contours, again, you're going to need a feature symbology defined that you want to use in order to go ahead and turn those on and how they are to appear. And so just like we did with the top and bottom mesh, we also need to define a symbology for our major and minor contours, which are shown here and here. And so let's go ahead now and create those. So again, I'm going to go over to my delivered symbologies and select my terrain major and minor contours, and we're going to copy those to our clipboard, and then we're going to go over to our linear tab in our Symbology spreadsheet, and we will paste those at the bottom here. So now we have entries for our 2 sets of contours. But again, just remember, keeping track of, we're going to need a MicroStation element template for these new entries, and we'll come and do that later. So now we go back to our corridor feature definitions and continue on. We've taken care of our contours. Then we have also the option here on the corridor element template entries. And so if we take a look at this, it might be a little bit easier to understand in this view on our element templates. For example, on your corridor element template, you can see where it's pointing to not a feature definition symbology here, but rather just a MicroStation element template. This modeling corridor graphics, conceptual corridor graphics. is pointing to how it's going to control the symbology of each of these particular entries. And so I've talked about this in a prior video where I'd explained this feature definition. And so you have all of these MicroStation element templates that need to be defined to match up with these particular entries. And if you remember, we copied this over from our delivered spreadsheet. So those element templates may or may not actually exist in the current agency's element template folder structure. And so we would need to make sure those element templates are also added. And again, we will do that in the next video where we're preparing those element templates. Then you have the rest of your different entries for your corridor handle length factor, corridor handle spacing. I talked about all of that in a prior video. The template drop, element template, the appearance of the template drop, and the template drop handle length factor. We have the single station drop MicroStation element template, the transition element template, the transition handle length factor, the point control element template, the key station element templates, the end condition exception element templates, the secondary alignment element templates. And again, all of these are new to OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, these last 4 columns. This one is definitely probably one of the most required inputs in terms of setting up your corridor feature definitions. It does require some additional symbologies to be set up, as well as some additional MicroStation element templates. The linear templates are essentially a scaled down version of the corridor templates. These are for your linear template drops. And again, I'm going to go back over to our delivered definitions, which is here, and go to our linear template tab. And I'm going to, again, take advantage of work already done. So I'm going to go over here and put everything in our clipboard, copy that, go back to our definition, and paste for our linear templates. The same concepts are going to apply here. It's going to use the same MicroStation element templates, the same symbologies. It does take out a few entries that are not supported by the linear template drops. So if you just look down through here, everything's going to be pretty much identical, except I've made a few changes in the corridor handle spacing, and also the last, some of the last columns are not here because they're not supported with element templates. And so you don't have, for example, in condition exception element template entries here. But all of the element templates that we create for the corridors will also be used here, and so it's not going to require additional features, symbologies, or is it going to require additional element templates. Our surface template is very simple. This is the easy one. If we come back to, again, I'm going to jump over to our delivered definitions and go to our surface template. And generally, you just have 2 entries here, either true or false. So I'm going to copy those, go back to our definitions, and we're going to paste them here. And so those are done now. And all this is doing is turning on and off the sub 3D break lines, the subsurface 3D break lines for our terrain models that use surface templates. So true or false. And typically this should work for everybody. They're either on or off. Then we have our terrain definitions. I'm going to save this. I haven't saved for a while. This is going to be how we display our terrain models, and you can see that it's already fairly complete. The only thing that you'll want to do over here, obviously on your description, we've talked about this multiple times now, put something in here, and then if you want to set some item types, you can. And then lastly, this is something you do want to pay attention to. For example, for your volume options, I can change one, and then I can go in and paste here. So if you want those to be considered for design, you can change those. Typically, I only set design on the one that has the triangles. You can certainly find your particular needs there. This came across over from Select Series 4. Again, we'll fill in our descriptions. There's really not going to be anything else to do in the surface components because this was pretty much set up for us in Select Series 4. Other than you will need to adjust the volume option. This is important. For example, if you want concrete sidewalk to be considered in computation, you need to set that to design. Typically on this, if it's not existing, I'll go ahead and just flip them all over to design. So I can take one of these and just do a copy and then come over here and just go down to the bottom and paste. And it'll flip them all to the same design option. So you have the different options there. It tells you what it will take, and so you can pick and choose. I just did this quickly. You'd want to go through this more carefully. Make sure that there's a subsurface entry there that's not going to probably be considered for design. So there's a lot of work here. This has been a long video, but this is, like I said, these two spreadsheets, this first one I showed earlier, and now the definitions, this is the core of your entire workspace. And so you're going to spend time here, but it's going to make it very easy for you to stay organized and to get things all consolidated.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.